Well, it's good to speak with you again, John. I look forward to hearing your views on supply chain risk and catastrophic risk. Can you start by
But
providing a brief background of yourself?
yeah, thank you, Dustin, for the opportunity to speak. Yes, it's John Manners Bell. I'm Chief Executive of Transport Intelligence. We're a research company with operations in the UK, Atlanta, and in Hong Kong. We've been around for 10 years or so and writing and researching the global logistics industry.
Can you talk about what you've seen as far as over the last 20 years regarding external risks and internal risks in the supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely, Dustin. I think this is really important, and I think this is a high priority for a lot of global manufacturers now, and also their logistics service providers. I think over the last 20 years, what we've seen is supply chain managers really focusing on reducing their internal costs, the costs in their supply chains. They've been focusing on lean inventory, centralized distribution, just-in-time delivery, and at the same time as that, they've been creating these virtual networks of for manufacturing and using layers of tier one, tier two, and tier three, and plus suppliers. So their supply chains have become really quite complex. Now, what this has done, it's reduced their internal risks. So they've been able to reduce their inventory. They've been able to improve their product life cycle, reduce them in time. So they've made it more responsive to their customers. But at the same time as this, they've really increased the vulnerability of their supply chains, and which has made them quite exposed to natural catastrophes, as we've seen with the Japanese tsunami and the Thai floods. We've also seen it in Europe with the volcano, which brought the air networks to a complete halt. And more recently, we've seen it in the US with Hurricane Sandy, bringing a lot of the east coast of the USA to a. I think going forward, manufacturers are really going to have to focus on getting the right balance between these internal and external risks.
And can you talk about how to address these risks?
Well, absolutely. And I think one of the problems which these manufacturers have faced is that it's a lot easier to actually measure internal costs, the costs of holding inventory, for example, than it is actually the external costs, because it's very difficult to know what an event is, what impact an event is going to have on the manufacturing strategies or the manufacturing processes of these big global high tech or maybe consumer goods manufacturers. So consequently, there hasn't really been a lot of focus put in. It's because it's been so easy for boards to be able to corporate boards to be able to focus in on reducing these costs, which they're able to measure. It hasn't been so easy for them to actually prioritize the external risks. Now, that's really changing because during the or following the Japanese tsunami, companies suddenly found that it was absolutely business critical. Companies have been outsourcing their production to remote locations, where, for example, high-tech companies and semiconductor companies have been very much prioritizing the development of suppliers in Asia Pacific region, in particular locations such as in Thailand, but they weren't actually undertaking proper risk assessment of where their suppliers were actually based. And that's something now that they are really focusing on to actually get a better understanding of what would happen if, for example, in the Thai floods, big clusters of high-tech suppliers were actually knocked out for several months. And this had a knock-on effect throughout the supply chain. And suddenly the major companies, the major high-tech manufacturers in particular, suddenly started realizing that this could be business critical just because of the way that they've developed over the past few years. So with this changing focus on actually looking at whole costs rather than just one element of the cost, the internal cost, they've really now started to develop their response. Companies like Cisco, for example, over the last 10 years have gone from a very reactive stance, so that therefore, if there was an event, they just deal with it as it came up. They've moved through a proactive period when they've suddenly started realizing that they actually should start learning more about their suppliers, going down to tier 3, tier 4, and even tier 5. And now their processes are engineered. So risk is actually engineered. Risk mitigation is engineered into their manufacturing processes. I think one of the sort of main catalyst of this was definitely the Japanese tsunami, because they had very little visibility of what was happening at tier 4 and tier 5. But one of the interesting things is that when you're that far upstream in the supply chain, the any sort of disruption you get to these sorts of suppliers has a real knock-on, a real snowballing effect, and it creates bottlenecks all the way down the supply chain. And so it's absolutely critical to know what supplier is supplying at which level, and whether there's any alternatives to that, to multi-sourcing of those products. And it's these sort of processes which are being hardwired in to their production strategies now.
And do you have any recommendations
Well,
for companies?
absolutely, yeah. I think it's very much the case that the manufacturers really need to start adopting either a proactive response, proactive approach to risk, and the and actually understanding, auditing their suppliers, because I think what's quite astounding to me is that it's still the lack of visibility that many multinational manufacturers have below tier 1 or tier 2. So they have very little idea of what an impact of a particular event happening in a particular part of the world is. And what Cisco have done is they put in place these processes which allows them to undertake an audit very, very quickly. They have a team of people who are monitoring events throughout the world, and once an event occurs, it can be escalated very, very quickly up the chain of command in Cisco, and the audit can be undertaken, finding out which products are affected, whether there are different sourcing strategies that can be employed, and what the impact of the certain event can be. And I think if I had one particular recommendation, it would be that manufacturers really need to look at their sourcing strategies, whether they need to pull back some manufacturing to or near sourcing, as it's called, to the maybe markets which are closer to their end users, but just to have a number of alternatives, not to put all their eggs in one basket, because many manufacturers have been caught out in the past few years as these natural disasters occur. And I think we've been seeing a lot more of these natural disasters over the few years, and I think we probably will expect to see them at regular occurrences over the next decade.
Well, thank you, John, for sharing your insights on both external and internal supply chain risks and the ways to address the problem.
Thanks, Dustin. It's a pleasure as always.
Yep, thank you.